So everyone, welcome. This is a bit more impromptu. I'm the director of Opa-locka. I'm not going to invite you. Welcome to our building. This is a bit of, as I said, impromptu. The weather, we're the weather plan for today's lecture. So they're glad to welcome you guys in the building. If you're not familiar with the Opa-locka, I encourage you after this lecture, you can go up and visit the exhibits and all the galleries. They'll be open until 6 o'clock, and we are free for everyone today. So you'll have a couple hours at least to visit and see what we have in the collections. I would encourage you, if you're a Florida resident, you don't have time to go upstairs, come back and visit us again. You're always free visitors here as a Florida resident. And if you're a City of Miami Beach resident, if you have not already done so, sign up for your City of Miami Beach free membership to Opa-locka. We're benefiting from the Arts and Cultural Cause Initiative here, and part of our big back to the community is a free membership for family membership for all citizens on the beach. So you'll get invited to special things, and you'll get a discount in his store, which is usually the most fabulous for most people. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dennis Opa-locka, who is busily texting and looking out here. He's ready. So he's going to introduce today's speaker. He's the director of the Resurfacing and probably been all over the place for the past few days.
Thank you. I think that's around. I'm so happy to have you all. Can you guys hear me okay? So, as Casey mentioned, we are producing this great event market the weekend, and it's our final day. But there's still a lot going on, including this lecture and some other lectures after this at the museum. You can at our museum, just on Ocean, and you can come and check those out. And also, we have our music going on all afternoon at 12th Street through 8 p.m. So we're really excited to have you all here. We're going to do this outside in the park, but we're really thankful we have friends like Opa-locka that have last minute space when we are tropical weather backs up. But we are very excited about this talk regarding Opa-locka. I learned about Opa-locka a lot when we were looking through Barbara Bear Company's archives. That was our founder, who left all our archives to NPPL, and our job, part of our role, is digitizing and learning about what her life was like and what she did. And there were a lot of things, a lot of letters, a lot of drawings about Opa-locka. And so when I learned that there was a group that had started re-energizing Opa-locka, we were really excited because, like many of Barbara's big ideas, this is one that probably needs some even more work to continue preserving. And we also know with Art Deco that even Art Deco is erased with some of the state legislation. So we all have to work together with our individual historic places to make sure that they stay, because Florida history is maybe not, the same as other history, but I think it's really unique in its own way, and it's worth saving and coming forward. So we're really lucky today to have Linda Stevenson, PhD in aviator, who is a preservation architect and an adjunct professor at the University of Florida's Historic Preservation Program. And I met Linda in Tallahassee when we were there for Florida Trust Advocacy Days, and she's a great ally and, one of the many people that are running up in Tallahassee to make sure preservation remains here. And we also had Alex Van Mecl, who is a public relations professional turned citizen preservationist, and really is the force behind the Opa-locka Resurfacing. They have a great Instagram as well that I always see, and I'm like, wow, I get good ideas from their group too, because they're great at marketing. We all know Barbara was a great marketer. And so without further ado, join me in welcoming the speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Real. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay back there? Awesome. Thank you. We really wanted to thank you all for coming out on this gloomy day to join us for the presentation today. So I'm Linda Stevenson. This is Alex Van Mecl over here. And one thing to mention too about Alex, he's also the citizen preservationist. He is the ambassador extraordinaire of Opa-locka. And I count myself very fortunate to have him as a colleague on our project that we'll share with you today. So This is a great aerial view of Opa-locka in 1926. In January of that year, the Miami Daily News published a little advertisement, and it said, "Beauty in building, permanence in place." And what's really wonderful about Opa-locka is that it had this grand vision in the 1920s, and moving forward today, that vision is energized again, as you'll see. So just to, there'll be a few parts to the presentation. So the way this project came about, our director of our program at the University of Florida happened to be in conversation with a representative from the City of Opa-locka one day, a couple of years ago. And she is not from Florida, so she learned all about Opa-locka and got really excited about it. And we decided that we needed to do a project with our students to do a cultural resource survey in Opa-locka to see exactly what's there. So this particular rendering is by the architect who was involved with Opa-locka, Bernhard Emil Müller, and very talented Beaux-Arts trained architect, very fluent in a number of historical kinds of styles. And so the vision for Opa-locka, driven by the developer, was to create this Moorish Revival paradise, basically. And you can see how Müller really embraced that. The other thing that you'll see about the community is that it was designed as a complete community, not only residential, commercial, institutional, educational, and spiritual resources were included in the design. So just to orient a little bit, Opa-locka is in the north end of Miami-Dade County, far north of where we are here. The little map shows the red boundary is the city limits of Opa-locka, but the original plat where all of the resources are located is inside that little blue square. So that's where we decided to focus our project, basically. Another key feature of Opa-locka is, of course, the airport, which has a great play in its history as well. So the question was, why should we resurvey Opa-locka? In 1982, 4 buildings there were nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. And I think this is when Opa-locka kind of got on the preservation community's register, if you will. So that particular nomination focused on 4 of the commercial institutional buildings, one of them being the marvelous city administration building there, which really embodies this very picturesque and poetic interpretation of Moorish Revival architecture, as you can see. A few years later, 2 historians, Michael J. Maxwell and Emily Perry, to whom we owe an enormous debt in terms of the fabulous research that they did to enrich the understanding of this community, rewrote that nomination and included 18 more buildings, some residential, some commercial. Sadly, 3 of those are gone today. Unfortunately, we've already had some losses of these really important places. There were many more buildings, though, that were designed within that community, as we'll see shortly. And then through the 90s and the 2000s, there were small little survey projects done, scattered around the community, mostly to address compliance reviews for when there would be like projects going in, for example, work at the airport or cell towers. You would do a small survey just around the initial area of the project. But it's been 40 plus years since there's been a comprehensive survey. So again, these were the 4 original resources on the survey: the City Hall building there with its minarets, its crenellated parapets, and the domes, those wonderful domes. Down below is a very important commercial structure at the corner of Alibaba and Opa-locka Boulevard, a key commercial corner in that community. Again, dating from 1926 and embodying still today many of those architectural features, all designed by Bernhard Müller. Then in the lower right is the Opa-locka, what was the Opa-locka Bank building. It was conceived as an Egyptian revival structure. It was never a bank, though, actually. It was taken over by a church and has performed that function since. And then up above is the wonderful train depot that they have. And again, the access by rail was a key feature of being able to develop that community back in the 1920s as well. So here's a construction photograph, and so you can see this wonderful empty landscape with these Moorish Revival dreamy buildings emerging from that landscape, which is the perfect fantasy land. This is the Hurt building, again, the building on the corner. And in its original conception, it had a drugstore, it had a little gas station there. So it was really like this commercial hub right at that key juncture in the community. The Opa-locka Bank building going up, and again, your very typical kinds of construction materials you'd see from this period, that hollow clay tile and such, and very characteristic of the construction. And then this great photo here of the train depot on the rail side, which is active today as a stop on the tri-rail. So it still retains that aspect. So then in the 1987 survey, several buildings were added, including these two examples here. And even though some minor details of the buildings have changed over time, you can still read that Moorish Revival influence in these homes here. So I'll tell you a little bit about our project. So we were lucky enough to meet Alex, and he was very gracious to host our survey team with our students here last year when we were doing this work. This is his house, which I'll tell you about a little later. And so we had the opportunity to come into the community and conduct a survey. So again, here's just a map of the area that we studied in the original first plat of that community. And it's been subdivided since, but we mostly focused our efforts in the green zone over there and the blue zone just to the north of Alibaba Boulevard there. And that's also where the rail line goes, and on that strong diagonal. So I know some of you in this audience have certainly done survey work, and you know how data intensive it can be. So one of the things that we did in this project in particular is try to find ways to grab data in the field really fast, because it can be a really tedious process. So we generated a little application on our cell phones that's tied to a GIS system. And so students went out in the field and were able to look at each building, go parcel by parcel, building by building, record what they needed. And then we also did some work, archival research as well. And a couple of really important resources include the archives of Bernhard Müller, which are held at the University of Miami Special Collections. So that was an incredible resource. We had his original drawings, and actually Alex had done a tremendous amount of work already researching those archives as well. So that was a huge help for us. So basically, this is kind of what our app looks like on our phone. So for each of the buildings, we would record the materials, the shape of the building, just all of those key architectural features. And what that allowed us to do was to really document the building well. And the other cool thing we could do is to pinpoint the house location on the map. So it's already integrated into the GIS system, which is incredibly useful when you have to start evaluating the information that we gathered. So here, these were all the sites that we were able to record with our system there. You can see them with that wonderful street pattern that is still extant today. It was one of the key features of Opa-locka in the 1920s. And then we can go in with our computer and manipulate the data and add information that we need. And then in terms of the archival research, this is just one example of Müller's archives here. There's this beautiful renderings, and this is just a little concept sketch for one of the houses in that community. So just a very short history of Opa-locka. As part of the Florida land boom, the developer came down to Florida and developed several communities, including Hialeah. And Opa-locka was the last of these three communities that Curtis worked on. So around the 1920s is when that work started, and the development formally begins in 1926. And interestingly, when the hurricane came through 9 months later, really after the start of that construction, fortunately, given the way the buildings were starting to go up and the materials that they used, they weren't really that damaged. Plus, it was very far inland, so you didn't have the same flooding threat you would have in other places. By January 1927, there was enough infrastructure and buildings present that the first festival called the Arabian Nights Fantasy was held, and that was a recurring festival that happened in the community for a number of years. And then a few years later, of course, the Depression begins, but the real death knell to this first phase of development in Opa-locka is the death of Glenn Curtis in 1930. But by then, the vision was already established. So just a few of the key players here. This is Glenn Curtis, a very dapper gentleman on the left. He was an entrepreneur, a developer, an aviation pioneer, and that really played a big role in the development of Opa-locka. The architect, Bernhard Müller, there. Harry Hurt, the gentleman who developed the commercial building that you saw earlier, and he was also on the city council. And then the town planner, it's been attributed potentially to Clinton Mackenzie, who was a well-known architect of that particular period and well-versed in historic design. But again, we don't have a plat with his name on it, so we're going to mention him, but we don't really have corroborative evidence just yet. So this is, again, Harry's building, the Hurt building there, and then what it looks like today in detail. And you can see it's still got its crenellated parapets, its minarets, and its domes. So then we took a look at what happened to the community after the death of Glenn Curtis, because that's a whole interesting story in and of itself. So the original survey work really focused on that early development period, but not much was focused on after that. So we decided to take a look at the airport, because as Curtis was an aviation pioneer, we thought it was really interesting that he had that airport there, and was one of the drivers in the sort of the post-1930s period in Opa-locka. So by 1940, a naval air station is commissioned at that location. And it plays a pivotal role in what happened next in that community. So here's an aerial view of the airfield from the 1940s. And just one interesting little aside, Amelia Earhart, on her fatal voyage, she left out of Opa-locka in her plane, actually. So that was a place in 1937 where she started that flight and didn't come home, unfortunately. So we also looked at the architecture of this period. So this is the elementary school. There's your school from 1937. And it has some really interesting features too. There's a little bit of Art Deco around the main building entryway there and some other very characteristic features of this particular period. And then we took a look at sort of the post-war period. And so you see some really nice examples of simplified modernist structures. So for example, the church building here from 1954. And this wonderful post office that they have, this really nice little international style almost post office from 1962 in Opa-locka as well. And then the residential. So after 1930s, most of the buildings are essentially basic ranch houses or what we call transitional ranch from that period before full-blown ranch houses. So the vast majority of the community has mostly structures like this, again, really important and significant in their own right. Another piece of our project that we'd like to train the students in is community engagement. And so we were very fortunate at that moment in time. Opa-locka also had just become a Main Street city. So we had one of the people from National Main Street. We had the Florida Main Street director with us one day, and we were working with the city on some different kinds of events. And so that was, the timeliness of that really helped in terms of getting the community interested in our project also. We also have to study community demographics to figure out if we're going to make recommendations to a community, who is living there now, what are their interests, and how do we get them excited about historic preservation. So we just did a quick study, and so you can see from 1940 to 1960, there was a huge increase in population, driven, of course, by the Naval Air Station and the military personnel that came to town. And then currently today, there's roughly about 16,000 or so people within the city proper. We took a look at who lives there, and one of the key things about Opa-locka is it's a fairly young community. The median age is about 33 years old, and you can see that really makes up the working age population is really more than half of the residents that live in that community. So that's something to consider when we were trying to design a community engagement project. So one of the key lessons that we took away from this was we really needed to talk to the residents and try to meet the public, the people that are there, where they are. So we translated some of our handouts into Spanish just so that we could communicate with some of the residents in the community. And probably the best story about this is, if you remember Harry Hurt, the developer, this was his house in Opa-locka. And we were standing outside, Alex, myself, and a student, and we had our papers with us. We were sort of pointing at the house, and the owner comes out wondering, what are we doing outside of her house? So we chat with her, and Alex shows her this picture, the original photograph of Harry Hurt's house from the 1920s. She gets incredibly enthusiastic, and that was one of the great days in the field because we had actually, touched a person, and they had gotten really excited about their community and the value of what their house is and their integration into that community. So this is what we found, basically. We were able to document over 600 new sites with our system. And this little map over here, the orange area is essentially the airport area, and the little black dots are projects that were done before our work in the community. And this was our results. And so, interestingly, most of the buildings in the community are post-war period, by and large. But the magenta dots are all of the Moorish Revival structures in that community. So you can see there's little clusters of them scattered all around. And the scale of even the post-war buildings, it's small, and they all seem to kind of make a nice cohesive whole together. Stylistically, again, Moorish Revival makes up, a fairly significant portion. Of course, again, most of the buildings were post-war period. And generally speaking, conditions, were generally pretty good for the remaining structures that were in our area. So that's just the sort of data analysis we were able to do. And then one of the students took upon himself to figure out where all the other buildings might be. And our suggestion is that even though perhaps a building, for example, at the bottom there has been altered a lot, but it's still one of these little precious gems, and it really ought to be preserved and protected. And the thing is, there was a documentation on many of those buildings, so if somebody wanted to restore it back to what it was, they certainly would have the evidence to be able to do that as well. So just quickly, some other recommendations that we suggested that people consider is maybe to incentivize rehab projects that you could restore some of those missing elements, like, for example, put the domes back on your houses, perhaps. Another one would be in the 1920s, there was an amateur landscaping contest that was part of the development plans for the community, and people were encouraged to enter that. So the thinking was that would be a really great tie back to the past. And with that, I'm going to pass on the presentation to Alex to tell you about what's happening right now in the community and the future.
Excellent, thank you so much. And I want to thank each and every one of you has said. I just want to echo a great appreciation for descending on us today to learn about this special community, all things considered, especially with the weather. So Linda did quite a fantastic setup for what Opa-locka is, why it became what it became, and more or less a current snapshot. Once again, my name is Alex Van Mecl. I am a former, actually, public relations professional. Now I'm a senior project manager at a nonprofit developer based in Opa-locka, 10 North Group. I'm also the vice chair of our Historic and Environmental Preservation Board, and most proud to be a historic homeowner, which was a long-held passion, especially being a first-time homeowner. So one of the things that I was really entranced by in identifying this property that I was lucky enough to get was more or less that there was not a singular vessel to be able to fully understand and revel in the why of Opa-locka, as well as any historic documentation in the singular source. So the home kind of helped set the stage for what would become a larger passion project, which would later inform an appointment, as well as now my official alignment to actually put to work some of these incredible ideas that Linda and her team had come forth with, as well as some independent projects that I've been working on in some time. So the thing that's really driving and informing everything that I love about this place, Opa-locka, which is the longer phrase. It's a Seminole Creek word that means a big area or island surrounded by water. So not only do we have the Curtis Aviation Connect, so entrenched in aviation and aeronautics industry, but we actually have a significant ancient connection to the Tequesta going back 5,000 years. How many of you are local residents or you're in Miami? Few of you. Okay, perfect. So I'm sure you've heard about what's happening in downtown with the related group, and there's an active archaeological dig that they're trying to make concessions, compromises with to protect. We too in Opa-locka have that same level of imprint of the Tepessa people, the indigenous people, as well as the Seminole, in an area known as Cook's Hammock. It's in the district of our current Miami-Dade Opa-locka Executive Airport. We have an Amazon fulfillment center there. Needless to say, that kind of was the origin story of Opa-locka as a name and why Glenn Curtis wanted to honor these indigenous people in calling Hialeah as he did. Country Club Estates, Miami Springs was a little bit different, but Opa-locka was his last and I think greatest idea. So 100-year anniversary is what we cusp of it. So everything that I'm working toward, I'm putting under the umbrella of the Renaissance Projects. I like to think of, just like the title of this talk today, the resurfacing of the Moorish magic. It's just that. This is about getting out there and starting to inform residents, both former and present, of the why. Why do we have that iconic palace at the end of the street? Why do we have a train station look the way that we do? Why put period-appropriate awnings on their homes? Well, it all funnels into a larger narrative and appreciation for aesthetic that, unfortunately, died with Glenn Curtis very early on. So Linda showed some of these pictures. The one I love in particular is a house that happens to be my neighbor on Jann Avenue. It's an Arabic word from the Arabian Nights stories about an evil, mischievous genie. So in theory, the designs of the homes were intended to speak to and really represent the character, story, or moment in the Arabian Nights novels, inextricable connections to. So we might not ever know why the Haslip House had a minaret as one of very few in the larger collection of Bernard Mueller's drawings. But it's fantastic. This is a perfect example of a home that still stands today. The only thing that's missing from it, like many of the homes, is the dome. My house is included in that. So none of the work that I'm championing at present, that Linda has been able to pick up with her students and will continue to do in her preservation program at UF, none of this would have been possible without Michael Maxwell, Emily Perry, as she had mentioned, all going back to the 80s, like many communities, like with what Barbara was doing here in our Deco district. They really set the stage of the why. Why should we save this, especially with as limited resources that we have? We don't have the 1,200 plus landmarks that Coral Gables does. Today we have a modest 50 or so. But these people are the ones that set the framework. It was the last major restoration of that iconic building you see behind you. They established, for the benefit of the Opa-locka Historic Preservation Board, an entire program, an educational shtick, if you will, to get people to come out, appreciate and really buy into the question mark of why should I, especially if I'm coastal, drive 40 minutes or so inland to see this place. They set that stage. And of course, Barbara Cabin herself was a fierce advocate, and I think that's one of the things that I caught on to as a historic homeowner and citizen preservationist for Opa-locka very early on. At the same time of discovering Michael Maxwell and his work, I was reading about this force of a woman that was doing incredible things to save this precious gem, let alone going, as I said, 30 to 40 minutes inland to impart her enthusiasm, her aggressiveness to do the same for Opa-locka. So it kind of comes full circle to be giving a talk during Art Deco weekend with her face kind of right on top of us. It's very sentimental and meaningful to continue her work. And I'd like to think that I have as sharp of a tongue as she did, because I don't mince words when I'm talking to the city of Opa-locka. And this is just a journey of discovery related to my home. So Maxwell, Emily Perry, they recorded every single homeowner at the very beginning, immediate second, third, fourth, mortgage foreclosures, everything in between, documented in endless detail. My house was part of that, but I hadn't had access to that archive. I hadn't discovered it just yet. So it all started with the plaque. Those are the plaques that we have for the original 1980s registry that Linda was talking about, that were afforded national status, but also 26 or so on the local Opa-locka registry. My house was one. That's how I found it. That's what I got it to go to. And everything to the right was information courtesy of the internet that Emily Perry and Michael Maxwell didn't have access to. There was no internet. There was no newspapers.com to be able to simply type in WT Dove, which was on the original elevation drawing that UM has in their archives that is also not digitized. And then the rest is history. The warranty deed, the fact that he died of an illness 2 years into moving in the house, died in the house of a stroke. She lived in the house until 1934 with her 4 kids. The car that he was driving, that they had to sell because they needed the money right after his death. I mean, I implore you, if you're not already, to subscribe to newspapers.com or just revisit internet research. The Digital Public Library of America is another fantastic source. The fact that I can go back 96 plus years and resurface some of the minutia of who these people were, and then Facebook, the thing I love to hate on, and yet we all rely on some aspect of social connectivity. These 2 pictures that you see here, that's Walter Dove on the left, a military vet, and his wife and his 4 kids, and his in-law, the mother's mother, all came from a connection from a army organization out in Clearwater, Florida, and the descendant, the daughter of Jack Dove, one of the 2 twin boys who lived out in Los Angeles, sent me these 2 photos. And it's like, if that's not cosmic, I don't know what is. And the fact that as a born and raised Floridian, Fort Myers in the house, I graduated from Florida Atlantic University. Sorry, FIU. You were my first choice, but sorry. Needless to say, went out to LA for almost 8 years working in the entertainment industry, only to come back to my home city, live on a street that is the same as my middle name, and to be entrenched by a city developed and designed by storytelling, by the Arabian Nights, by the Thief of Baghdad silent film, and then to learn that this very family stayed as one of the longest founding Opa-lockan families of any other house in this community, only to go back or move to the place that I just came back from. It was just like, it was a tear fest. I'll just admit that much. My husband was embarrassed for me. So this is a few of the items of what constitutes the Mueller collection of over 900 watercolors, elevation drawings, photographs, little sketches, notes with Glenn Curtis's penmanship on it. It is extraordinary. I say this all the time to Opa-locka's elected officials as well as homeowners I'm getting to know of these historic properties. We are so lucky to be able to know that we have this at our disposal. So as a crazy person and independent from any official capacity, I informally digitized the entire collection and I gave it to the city, and the rest is history, but we're still working on it. So if we ever at any point wanted to resurrect recently lost structures as limited since 3 on the National Register no longer stand, in theory, we could do that. So if you know anybody that's in the development world, hit me up because we need to talk. So this is what my house looked like in 2011. That's what it looks like today. The one and only thing, I put a dead center of this slide because it's dead center in the style of this home, is the dome that you see there, about 2.5 feet in diameter, perched right on top of that front door. I even went to Morocco and I got a little lantern for the front to kind of be reminiscent of what it called for. So it's been an incredibly gratifying process. And you know, again, as a first-time home, you want to get that window to restore the original porch room. You do the railing, and then you realize the whole roof was about to collapse. And unfortunately, Opa-locka's economics simply don't allow for that aggressive form of restoration programming, if you will. So we're trying to look at opportunities of establishing with city funds grant programs for privately held residences, which has happened. It's just not as often found, something we're currently working on. So current activities and programs, in addition to the Opa-locka Preservation Association, also Discover Opa-locka.org for shorthand, which also has a social media presence. I've been very active in doing the research, first and foremost, to impart it on teams like Linda, even the city, to kind of get a base understanding of 1920s, 30s, and to grow from there in offering historic walking tours. So for those of you local, I hope this is just planting a seed for you to want to actually come, touch, and bear witness to the things we have going on, as well as the tours. And speaking of tours, this is just a snapshot of the 4 that I gave last year. We have incredible turnout. People really do believe in still and want to come even from as far away as West Palm Beach on the Tri-Rail. And as Linda said, our historic station is next to a newer 1990s active Tri-Rail station in the Moorish Revival design, which was a big win for the community. And now that very station, as of just yesterday, historic moment for those of you that were paying attention, Opa-locka and every community north of Hialeah is now reconnected to downtown Miami, Miami Central with the Tri-Rail line in the first time in decades, which is like a momentous occasion when you think of urban planning and people, especially workforce housing, workforce members, being able to come more directly inland using public transit. So the tours are just helping to serve as an anchor attraction, as an experience. And as time goes on, I would love to be able to train docents to be able to do what I'm doing, because it's not always fun in June and July when you're grinning and bearing the Florida weather and humidity. Another project, and this is specific only to my house, to be clear, but it helps kind of set the precedent of what can come, is bring back the domes. And that's something that we've been talking with the city ad nauseum about. The current city manager, Darby Williams, set aside $100,000 for 4 homes to kind of serve as a pilot project. One dome in particular is nearing, with current contractor estimates, $20,000 to $25,000. That's my specific project, and this is a rendering of what a structural engineer has done to kind of bring back what has since been lost and very early on was taken away. And the thing I'm most proud about that Linda's heard me talk about endlessly, that's been the biggest learning curve, to marketing, to public relations, to wanting to get facts and history right, while also considering what information can people latch on to, what visually is enticing for people to want to see, to learn about this history. The short answer, and I like easy wins in communities, is a heritage trail. So for the first time in Opa-locka's 97-year history, we have a permanent museum-like experience, this in fact being an outdoor experience that people can enjoy in its 15 stations in the downtown area. Site number 1, it looks like it starts at the iconic City Hall, and more or less it does. It's next to it, but it's in an even more special place, and that's our historic fire station, which was the place where they actually incorporated Opa-locka as a town before becoming a city a year later. So it kind of was very ceremonious to be able to say the first ever marker starts at the first place. So this place became Miami-Dade's 8th oldest community. So really proud of this project. As you can see, City of Opa-locka employee, he actually staged for us to get that shot in the City of Opa-locka in the back. But they're currently in the process of installing them. Of the 15, there's 2. It's a lot harder to install than I imagined, but this should hopefully launch sometime in April. And this is another project near and dear. 10 North Group is the owner of the Harry Hurt Building, the historic Seaboard Airline train station, but also a number of pieces of vacant property throughout downtown that they're going to be putting mixed-use affordable housing in. But the one anchor attraction, as I see it, just visually based on the original construct of this building in particular, is that train station. And so we're re-examining its current use, which is not being fully realized. It's used for summer workshops, special events on the loading dock, but it isn't a permanent attraction for people like you to be able to come out and enjoy, even on a weekday, cocktail evening on a Friday night, perhaps. We need to start changing this reputation for those that know Opa-locka. As someone that's lived there for over 2 years, I can say it's not what you think it is. And I think that's the thing I love most about my historic walking tours, any talk that I give about the city, is the reputation of what once was needs to be completely upended, because that's not what it is today. And more or less, hopefully these activities give evidence of that, including the larger vision of OMA, the Opa-locka Museum of Art and History, at that train station. And God willing, my coffee shop will go in there too, but we got to start small and build up from there. So that's more or less a concept rendering of what it could look like to have this kind of robust, energetic, and lively environment surrounding it. And for those also that know about the AKA Historic City Hall, but as Linda said, the administration building of the Opa-locka company, we're in really good hands. For the first time since 2014, due to a variety of funding and political mismanagement reasons, I'm very proud to say and continue to announce and promote that we are well on track to get this beautiful 3-story building fully restored, again, since 2014, which was the last time they touched the building. So as you can imagine, from a contractor standpoint, there has been new discoveries about things that kind of went to the wayside and sitting there for so long. But these photos were taken 2 days ago for your guys' benefit, to give you a current snapshot. The building is not of its original coloration. There was a lot of stucco work that needed to be done. The roof decking needed to be completely replaced. But needless to say, what I refer to as the heartbeat of the community, what I'm kind of anecdotally calling the People's Palace, since it's no longer going to be served as a city hall building, it's going to be a cultural center, and especially since this has been so metaphorically representative of the health of the community, its financial status, political status, etc. And now that on that front, those things have begun to improve, and this building is coming back online, it beckons what's next for Opa-locka, and that's why I spend so much time on my tours talking about it, especially from an architectural standpoint. I mean, it's so nonsensical. It doesn't follow any specific order in how it was designed, and yet it's perfect. And it really helped to serve the framework of what Opa-locka's larger Oriental vision was supposed to become. In addition to that, the owners of the historic bank that Linda had mentioned, the Preservation Association, as well as allies in Coral Gables, were successful in nominating the Opa-locka Bank as an 11th estate with the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. And I'm very happy to also announce that the owners of the building, although this has been long vacant and attached to a congregation, a Baptist church, they've agreed more or less to start engaging in the process of getting estimates, getting a contractor to examine it, and hopefully bring it back online in the next couple of years so that it has a community purpose and funnels directly into our downtown area, which unfortunately has not reaped the benefit of wise planning choices as it relates to maintaining commercial and retail structures. They've largely, for the benefit of state and municipal structures, eliminated the mom and pops, the brick and mortars from the 50s. There's only a couple of structures left. It then becomes even more integral and vital, not just to state for its national and local registry status, but for function. I mean, we need to see that as an opportunity to be able to bolster the reason for Main Street America coming in and designating us, let alone us having a CRA as part of our district as well. The Art of Transformation, for those of you that participate and get excited as I do for Miami Art Week and Art Basel, the Art of Transformation is an event that's been on and off for the last 10 or so years. The last 2 iterations of this featurette, if you will, based in Opa-locka, it has been an Art Basel officially designated satellite event, which was an incredible honor for 10 North to achieve, for this organization and this event to receive. And of course, the lineup of Miami Art Week. 10 North is one of the largest, if not the largest private collection, 300 plus pieces and growing, of African and African diaspora art. We also feature local artists throughout the year, but it's been acutely of interest of the leadership of this organization to go to the continent of Africa and establish relationships with the artists to make their art free and publicly accessible to people of the community. And that's been a mission as part of the 10 North Arts Foundation. So we're really proud to have gotten that designation. It involves lectures, presentations. We had a vote night in Opa-locka in December, which was That in of itself is a historic moment, and it was a beautiful representation of the Puerto Rican community presenting that. So it's very inclusive, to say the least. And we activate two of our historic buildings, the Hurt Building and the train station, for that. So it's kind of becoming more or less the Opa-locka Arts District that we're starting to lean into. And the beginning of this presentation talked about resurfacing the Moorish magic. That's not just in examining its past, it's also, and just as exciting for me, looking to its future. Because we have such limited resources standing still from the 1920s, and we had such an influence of that post-war, and quite honestly, the Navy, the Marines, the CIA being at their hub right next to our community, it both helped the community's growth and then contributed in the complete blight that Opa-locka experienced from the 80s on, with a lot of people fleeing the city and creating vacancies. So needless to say, there's some really exciting projects that are happening. This one in particular is a concept and latest rendering of a senior project, a senior housing facility that's going to be in downtown Opa-locka and part of a larger master plan called Opa-locka City Terrace. Every white block that you see there is empty land that needs to be developed per federal guidelines and having acquired those properties. So the density of Opa-locka, as it was originally planned by Glenn Curtis and his town planners, is going to exponentially increase in the next 5 to 10 years, and of course be surrounded by all these iconic historic structures as well. And so much of the challenge of examining, we want to honor the history of Moorish Revival. What is that? How do we strip away the various elements? If you're talking about crenulated parapets or the minarets, what connotations does that have? Because essentially domes are representative of house of worship or divine. How do you make that make sense for an affordable housing, senior housing project in downtown? And so that's part of the exploration, and that's the exercise that we're currently undergoing. Whether it be the keyhole windows and archways you see at the bottom to the parapets at the top, even those wind gates that you often see in towns like Marrakesh and Morocco. We're trying to expand on what Bernard Miller was doing, which is to be playful, be respectful, but also push the envelope, see what you can do in scaling Opa-locka's downtown. So with that being said, folks, again, I thank you so much for being here today between Linda and myself. Most importantly, thank you very much. Most importantly is I hope to see you in Opa-locka. I had mentioned discoveropa-locka.org. We're on social media as well. We're going to continue establishing a clear line of communication with Linda and her team and students that will continue to impart their expertise, because I'm just a citizen preservationist. I'm the ground soldier to be sure that she has someone there that's going to be able to put the good work, the results of what they're coming up with, national registers and all. So with that being said, I welcome any questions that you guys might have for Linda or myself. And yeah, I think this mic works. You might have to turn it on.
Okay. I heard you mention a couple of times Main Street USA and also the Community Redevelopment Association. I'm actually a former Main Street director. And so what's the status of that? And I would love to volunteer and be a part of it.
Well, thank you. We'll take volunteers as often as we can get it. Current status is the designation was given December of 2021 as an apprentice community, as an apprentice associated organization. They're currently in the process of trying to formalize what that looks like and being an actual nonprofit organization with responsible players, a responsible executive director. So we've had endless support from Kathy at the state, the Main Street lead for Florida at our disposal, helping to kind of address the turnover and whatnot. It's been a challenge, to say the least. We don't have a downtown that has the vacancies that some main streets have to their advantage, and restoring and occupying with small business. So I think that we're on the cusp. We're just waiting for the right leader to take ownership in their executive director role to keep that energy going. But it's obviously an incredible designation, and one that, God willing, with the state legislature passing this year, let's hope, put the pressure on your state legislators to pass that tax incentive for Main Street communities. If you don't know about what's happening at the state level, please pay very close attention in the next 60 or less days. There's three pieces of legislation that you'll learn about from the Florida Trust that are critical in not just saving districts like coastal communities of our district, Art Deco, but even inland ones that really need that benefit of 20-30% tax rebates. So,
Do a CRA, Community Redevelopment Association, with or without the Main Street?
yeah, great question. We actually do have the Opa-locka CRA, and and the reason I put the bank building up, not kind of ahead of the curve, and just getting excited about the 11 to save, the reason for my enthusiasm about the pastor and the congregation coming to the table, I've been seeking and trying to find resources, whether it be non-denominational restoration funds, what have you. It's the CRA of Opa-locka and their current executive team that is taking, and they're going to amend their budget, and they're going to adopt a new line item pegged to the restoration costs for that building. So they're already doling out $100,000 for 10 businesses in the CRA district. They've already more or less allotted it to the bank. Obviously, it's going to be more than $100,000 to do a complete gut job, new roof, everything. But we do have, now we have an active CRA that has a competent team that's behind it, which means everything to a community like this where, a few $1,000s for an illuminated frontward-facing commercial sign makes or breaks your business model. And then when you go to Opa-locka, if you are to take my walking tour, you'll see that. You'll see that businesses that have been there for a handful of years, you don't even know that they're there. Because unlike South Beach, where you can kind of quickly pick out business over business, restaurant over restaurant, there's no signage on any of the buildings. And it's, cost efficiencies too. Unfortunately, it's not, Opa-locka is not a community of many means. So it is very much paycheck to paycheck for the businesses. So having a CRA implanted there to help address blight and help with revitalization is super important. But thank you for the question. And just to let everyone know, she is a former Opa-locka, and she went to Opa-locka Elementary, which was in the photograph there too. So I was enjoying just hearing her experience in the early 70s living there. I just read through it through the newspaper. So what it was like to live in Opa-locka in the 30s, 70s. But it's fun to meet people that are from the community and really care about it. Any other questions? This is for Linda or myself.
First of all, thank you for the information economics and such a great in-depth overview of the district of this area, because I had no idea what was thinking behind it. I have two questions. First is, what was the original inspiration for Arabian theme from Arabian Nights? Because if it's, I don't think anyone had a relationship with the Middle East or Central Asia and so on to bring up this to Miami area. And the second question that I have, Alex, have you go over what's the state program you've been mentioning that's in the process of going through legislative procedure?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'll address the one more complete. The second one, Linda, you might want to take that question. Linda's more affiliated with the Florida Trust and is doing great work. The genesis, the idea for the Arabian Nights motif. And to be clear, we define Opa-locka today, and even since 1987, as the largest collection of Moorish Revival architecture, emphasis on the revival pegged to the Moorish. It's not Andalusian influenced, it's not traditional Moorish. This architect was very playful with his designs, and again, some of it's nonsensical in a way. But how it all began, there's a couple of scenarios as to more or less what initiated it. But interestingly enough, we have to go south a little bit to the other second development of Glenn Curtis's, which was Miami Springs. And in that community, just around this time of them conceiving Opa-locka, which began in summer of 1925, they too were kind of waiting on certain economic factors as well as transportation infrastructure going in. The Seaboard Airline deciding to make Opa-locka the first Dade County station was the decision for Glenn Curtis to move forward with Opa-locka. Motif-wise, they had an Arabian Nights nightclub in Miami Springs at this time. And this is very much true, somebody, whether it be Glenn Kurtz or Bernhard Mueller or Glenn's mother, picked up the book, The Arabian Nights Entertainment, the 1907 edition, and in that book, and there's many iterations, there's children's version, what have you. This one in particular had illustrations from the French illustrator Edmond Dulac, and it basically painted a very vibrant interpretation of this majestic landscape as seen in the book. So they say that Bernard was immediately informed by those drawings, and there's one drawing in particular of Emperor Khosrow, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a long last name starting with a K. In that photograph, you see a temple-like mosque that almost quite literally looks just like our Opa-locka City Hall, a historic one. So the Arabian Nights was part of that Orientalism movement, since Opa-locka was known as an Oriental motif, not Moorish. They didn't use that term. It was Arabian Nights architecture or Oriental design. The Thief of Baghdad from 1924, a silent film from Douglas Fairbanks. That was another product of Hollywood, product of the art environment that helped to kind of go in that direction, wanting to do something different. And that's what I love telling about this tour, not just that we have a complete collection of the original drawings in archive, but that we really are the only community in North America that fully and concertedly adopted this style and vision. Unlike Coral Gables, Boca Raton, many coastal communities going Spanish Mediterranean, the Venetian of, the Venice of, we in Curtis wanted to do something completely different. And that's why they wanted the departure to the Orient, to the Far East, and to the Old World. And that's why we have exposed brick even on the walls too, to kind of show the distressed ancient status of these buildings that are on the cusp of getting 100 years old. So that's more or less what informs the Arabian Nights, later defined as Moorish Revival. And you can take the legislative question.
Sure. So the Florida Trust is working to advocate for a bill that's going to come up in the House and Senate, and it's a statewide tax credit. In fact, our former past president for the trust, Miss Jenny Wolf, is here with us as well. And so most states have a state historic rehabilitation tax credit. Florida does not at this point in time. There's the federal tax credit, which is a really great incentive for developers to rehabilitate properties. So in the legislature right now is the goal to pass the state tax credit on top of the federal credit. So that would be a really great incentive for someone to rehabilitate a historic building. And one of the provisions is if you're a Main Street community, it's 30%, is that right, Jenny? Or, yeah, so I think it's, you can get up to a 30% tax credit value of the rehabilitation costs that are sort of the, if you will, the approved rehabilitation costs. So it's a really powerful economic tool. And it's been 20%, I believe, for a non-Main Street or just, a regular rehab project. So that's going to come up. It almost passed last year. And so this year we're going to be heavily advocating again for that particular tax credit. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, folks, oh, yes, go ahead.
The tours.
Great question. That was kind of going to be my segue. I'm going to publish it in the next couple of weeks, an entire year schedule of every walking tour. They usually happen Saturdays at 10. I'll make an exception, do a few Sundays. But my end closing remarks on behalf of Linda and myself is we'll see you in Opa-locka. So stay in touch, stay tuned, and wish us luck over there. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.